Hi folks, I'm Simon Plenderleith, developer advocate at Platformatic. Earlier this week we announced that Platformatic Cloud is live and free for everyone to use. Today we're going to take a deep dive into all the features of Platformatic Cloud and how to use them. We'll also be integrating with Neon, a managed Postgres service, to deploy our database. Just this week, Neon have launched their new auto-scaling feature, which allows our databases to accommodate varying workloads. This makes Platformatic and Neon the perfect combination. A big thank you to the folks at Neon who helped us put together the workflows that we'll be setting up today. In the past few days, we've shared some fantastic tutorials from our content collaborators, showing how to build applications with our open source tools. And today we'll be focusing on how we can combine them with Platformatic Cloud. We'll be covering all of its features, including workspaces, logs, metrics, and preview apps. Let's get started. Let's head to Platformatic Cloud. And on this page we can click this button here to continue with GitHub, and this authorizes Platformatic to access our GitHub account. And click this authorize button, and then we land on the Platformatic dashboard. We can see that right now we don't have an app, so let's go ahead and create an app. And we're going to call this the Movie Quotes app. Let's create that application. Now we've got a page asking us to create a workspace, and these are the way that we can deploy our application into different contexts. So in this case we're going to create a static workspace where we put our production application, and we'll leave this toggle for now and we'll look at that in just a moment. So let's go ahead and create this workspace, production, and we need to make sure on this page that we grab our workspace ID and our API key. So I'm going to copy these now and drop them into my notes. So I've got some notes over here on my second screen. So this is our static workspace ID and our static workspace API key. And we'll be using these for deploying our production app. Now we're going to head back to the dashboard, and we want to go and create another workspace. So we click into our app, and then here on the left hand side we can see the workspaces that we have. Right now we've got that production one that we just created. So let's create another workspace, and this one we're going to call previews, and this will be where we deploy all of our preview apps for our pull requests. We can see that it's automatically being turned into a dynamic workspace because we already have a static workspace. So dynamic workspaces support multiple applications, which will mean we can have multiple endpoints for all the different previews that we have for different pull requests, allowing us to test out different changes, share them with our team and other people we might be collaborating on. So let's create this workspace. And again, we're going to grab our workspace ID for our dynamic workspace, and we're going to grab that API key too. Make sure we store them somewhere secure, perhaps a password manager, and then we can go back to the dashboard, and if we head into our app here, we can see that we've got both these workspaces, production and dynamic, which is that previews one that we've got set up just now. Now that we have things set up on Platformatic Cloud, let's go ahead and head over to the Neon website. So this is what we're going to use for hosting our Postgres database. So we'll click on this big sign up button here, and we're going to continue with GitHub. So we'll authorize it to access our GitHub account, and then we land on the Neon console. So this is their dashboard. So we're going to click on this link down here to create a new project. In this case we're going to call it Movie Quotes app, just to be consistent with what we've got in the Platformatic Cloud. And we can leave these as the default settings and create project. So that's been created straight away for us. We can close this pop-up, and if we scroll down a bit we'll see some of the details that we need to store for our database so that we can then integrate them with GitHub Actions once we get our application set up shortly. So the first thing we're going to do is grab this connection string here, and so we can just click the copy button, and we're going to save that, and that's going to be our Neon database URL production connection string. So we'll be using this a little later in GitHub. And now we also want to, from this particular connection string, we're going to grab out the username and the password. So we're going to later reuse them as dbuser and DB password. So we'll copy both of those and save them away somewhere secure. And then we also want to go and grab our project ID. So we're going to click on settings, and we can see we've got the project ID. We can copy that here and also save that in our notes. So this Neon project ID will come in handy later when we're configuring things on GitHub. Then we're going to head over to our account, and we're going to go to developer settings and generate an API key. And we'll just call this movie quotes app. And this again we'll be using with the GitHub actions later. So we can copy that key, save it somewhere nice and secure. And we've got all the settings that we need now from Neon. We can head back into the projects, and we're going to go ahead and actually look at start setting up our things on GitHub. Now let's head over to GitHub, and we're going to create a new repository. So this is where we're going to store our movie quotes app, which we're going to create in just a moment. And so we can scroll on down. We want to click this box to add a README file so that it initializes the repository for us. So we'll click Create Repository. Once our repository has been created, we can head over into the settings. And we're going to go and add all those different secrets and API keys that we've stored in our notes from Platformatic Cloud and from Neon. Now, there are a couple of ways we can do this. We're going to use environments in just a moment, but they're only available on paid GitHub plans. So it's worth mentioning, if you're not on a paid GitHub plan, you can head to Secrets and Variables and go to Actions, and then you can actually add any repository secrets you want here. Now we're going to use environments, and the reason we're going to use environments is because it allows us to control which branches have access to different secrets. We'll see in a moment why that's important. So first of all, let's create a production environment. And in this one, we're going to actually restrict it so that the deployment branch is only allowed to be on a selected branch. And so here, once we scroll down, we can add a deployment branch rule, and we're going to set it to main. And that means that when GitHub Actions run, which we'll be setting up shortly, they will only be allowed to access these secrets that are available if they're being run on the main branch. So now we're going to go and add a secret, and this is going to be our Platformatic Static Workspace API key. That's the first secret we're going to add in. And we'll be using this to actually deploy our app to our static workspace. This is our production app. So we're going to add that secret in. And then let's add one more secret. And that will be our Neon database production connection string. So hopefully you can see now why we're starting to separate things out. We don't want to mix the preview and the production credentials. It's important that we make sure that we're deploying things to different places and that we're not accidentally overwriting our preview environments and our production environments, because that would be very bad news. Okay, so now we have the production environment set up. We've got these two settings here, our Neon production credentials, that connection string, and we have that static workspace API key for Platformatic Cloud. Now we can go ahead, head back to environments, and we'll create one more environment, which we'll call previews, which corresponds with our Platformatic Cloud workspace previews. We've got a few more secrets to add to this one. We don't need to restrict the branches. All branches are going to be able to access this because we're going to be using these secrets whenever we open a pull request. So let's go and add a new secret. In this case, we're going to add the Dynamic Workspace API key, and that's where we are going to store our preview apps, where we'll be deploying them to. So we'll copy in the API key for that, add that secret, going to add another secret, and that's our Neon project ID. So we'll need this in order to be able to actually deploy branch databases. So Neon supports the idea of branch databases so that we can actually preview our database changes when we're opening up pull requests. So now we're also going to add the Neon API key, which again is something we need to be able to call the Neon API when we run our GitHub Actions. So that's 3 secrets in. We've got 2 more to go. We're going to drop in the database user, and that makes sure that we can actually connect to the database. And now we're going to finally add in our database password. So then we can go ahead and add that secret. And we now have these 5 secrets in place: our database password, database user, our Neon API key, Neon project ID, and the dynamic workspace API key for deploying to Platformatic Cloud. So we've got our 2 environments in place, previews and production will only be accessible if a GitHub action is running on the main branch. Now we want to clone our Git repository. So we're going to click here and then copy that clone URL, and then we'll head over into our terminal and we can run git clone. So now we're pulling down that empty Git repository, and then we'll change directory into that movie quotes app, and then we're going to run the npm creator wizard. So this will actually help us set up a brand new Platformatic app. And we're going to create a DB project. So DB gives us all the kind of extra advantages of being able to read our database schema. So it actually will look at our database tables, and it will automatically build a REST and a GraphQL API for us. We could use service, which is a much more bare kind of service setup. It has some things baked in for us, but it's if we want to create something completely custom. In our case, we're going to go ahead and create a DB project, and we're going to create it in the current working directory. And yes, we want to create the default migrations. We're going to have a plugin. We don't want to use TypeScript right now. And yes, we'll overwrite the existing README. We'll also run npm install. Now this can take a little while, as I'm sure you know. Alright, and now the npm install is done, we're going to say no, we don't want to apply the migrations right now. We do want to generate types for our app though. And we're going to go ahead now and set up our GitHub Actions. So it's asking us here if we want to set it up to deploy to a dynamic workspace. So that's where all our preview apps will go when we open up a pull request. So let's go and grab that out from our notes. So this is our dynamic workspace ID that we're dropping in here. And we'll copy and paste that in and then hit enter. And now we've been prompted for the static workspace ID. So we'll grab the static workspace ID, and that's where we're going to be deploying our production application. So we'll say yes for that, drop in that workspace ID, and everything's all set up. So let's take a look at what has been created for us. So we can see over here we have the movie quotes app directory full of lots of different files. And we are going to be working now with the migrations, and then we're going to work a little bit with tweaking some of the GitHub workflows, and then we'll have our application ready to deploy. So by default, Platformatic is configured to use SQLite, and we're going to be actually deploying our application with Postgres, so we need to change the schema a little bit. So instead of using an integer here, we're going to use serial, and that will actually give us an auto incrementing ID, so one that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on. And that's the kind of syntax we need for Postgres. So that's one little change. If you want to use Postgres in development, you could be using Docker. We won't have time to cover that today, but that's something worth looking at if you want to use Postgres for your application. Now we're going to tweak our GitHub workflows. So we can see here we've got a dynamic one and a static one. And we want to go and head over into our Platformatic Cloud docs, where we have a deploy a PostgreSQL database with Neon. And this guide shows how to set everything up. We've already covered setting up all the secrets and so on, but now we're going to actually configure the main branch workflow. So we can simply click copy on this code block here, head back into our editor, and this is the static workspace that we're replacing here. And we can see that it's going to read those secrets that we set for our production environment, and as well as actually handling deployment to our static workspace, it's also going to then talk to our Neon production database using that connection string that we set in our GitHub secrets. We also need to go back and add in that static workspace ID. So we'll grab that back from our notes and we'll copy in the static workspace ID, save that, and now we're going to go ahead and update the dynamic workspace workflow. Now if we head back to the guide we've got here in our docs, we can scroll down a little bit further and we can see we've got this configuration for the preview environment workflow. So this is when we're deploying GitHub pull requests as preview apps. So we're going to click here to copy that whole config, pull back in here and paste, and so we've got quite a big blob of YAML here. And let's take a little look at what it's doing so we can understand what's going on. So we are reading from the previews environment, which doesn't have access to those production secrets for the database or for Platformatic Cloud. And then what's going to happen is it's doing a bunch of stuff here where it's actually talking to Neon and creating a database branch. We can see that it's using that Neon project ID, API key, database user, and password that we set. And then down here, it's actually getting that branch database URL, that connection string, and then we're actually able to use it here to configure our Platformatic application. So the Platformatic application is being deployed to our dynamic workspace, and that's where all our pull request apps will go. And they'll be able to use, each one will be able to use its own branch database. So there's one last thing we need to do with the workflows, and we want to clean up those branch databases that are created when we open pull requests. So when we merge a pull request, or when we actually close one, we want it to go away so that we're not using up all our allowance of branch databases on Neon. So let's copy this path here and go back into our editor, and we're going to say new file, drop that in. So that's created a new file for us. Let's close up a few of the files here, and now we're going to go and copy that configuration and drop that in. So this takes care of calling the Neon API and actually searching for any kind of branch database that's there and deleting it for us, so that we've got that all cleared up nicely and automatically anytime we merge or close a pull request. Okay, so that's everything done with configuring our GitHub action workflows. So we can close up this file here, and we're going to then open back up our terminal and let's run git status. So we can see we've got our full application here. We're going to go ahead and actually add everything that we have, and then we're going to commit it with the message add Platformatic app. And now that's all been committed, we can go ahead and push that up to GitHub. Now that's been pushed up, we can head back over into our browser, and if we head over into GitHub Actions, we can see that there is a GitHub action running here, and we can look at that running and deploying to Platformatic Cloud. So if we head down here, we'll see this deploy project, which is running away. Once our application is finished deploying, we can click here on deploy project. We'll see that everything's being successfully actually added. We can click here on this link, and we've loaded up our deployed static application. So this is to our static workspace. This is our production app, and we've got it up and running with Platformatic DB. We can take a quick preview of the OpenAPI documentation. So this is for the REST API that's automatically generated by Platformatic DB. And then over here, we're going to take a look in our Platformatic dashboard. And if we head over into our static production workspace, we'll see that app that we've just deployed. We can see that we've got some metrics here, which can take a little while for new apps to show up straight away. So now we've got some requests coming in. If we actually go and open up that API documentation, we can make a request here and execute it. We can see it's made a request. It's got an empty response because there's no data in our database right now. But if we head over into our Platformatic dashboard, we can see the requests that have been coming through, and we can see the latency for those requests, how many connected clients. Right now there's no active clients because we've just made those requests. And we can also then go up here and explore this active generation for our static workspace app. Now over here we've got those same metrics that we saw on the previous page. We've also got the logs for the application. So in this case we can see all the different requests coming in and when the server starts up, and it's also helpful if we need to debug when things are going wrong with our applications. So we've got full logs for every application that's deployed. Now that we have our app deployed to Platformatic Cloud, we're going to go ahead and create a new feature for our app. So let's head over to our terminal and we're going to create a new branch. We'll call this add quotes because we're going to add the movie quotes as a feature, and we're going to then go ahead and use the Platformatic CLI to actually generate some empty migrations for us. So when we run this command, we can then head over here and see in our migrations directory, it's created two empty files for us, the do file and the undo file. Now this undo file here, we're going to drop a bit of prepared SQL here. So this is going to create a table called quotes for us if it doesn't already exist. It will have an ID field which auto increments, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on. We'll store the quote for the movie quote as text, the character that said it from the movie. We'll store the likes, which will be a number that we're going to actually build some custom functionality for in just a moment. And then we've got the created at timestamp, and we're linking it to our movies table, which we've already got, which has been defined by our first migration here. Now in our undo, if we ever want to roll back this migration, we're going to actually drop in a drop table quotes, and that will allow us to roll back the migration if we ever need to. Now that we have our database schema set up for quotes, we're going to go ahead and open up our plugin, and we can see that we've got this empty plugin file, and inside of there we're going to build in our custom functionality. Now first of all, we're going to add a route, and this route is going to be a post route, and we're going to have it under quotes so that we can actually go ahead and like a quote. And that's that like field that we saw earlier. We want to be able to increment it. So we're going to actually define an async function which handles taking a request, and then we're going to handle that here. So for now, let's just return an empty object. Let's have a think about what else we need to add. So for somebody to add a quote or to like a quote, they need to be able to pass in this ID. Now we want to be confident that this ID is actually a number and not some other kind of potentially malicious or incorrect data. So here we're going to add a schema as one of the options, and let's define a schema object. And this will allow us to actually validate that request data that's coming in. So we're validating the request params, and we are using here JSON schema, which is the default validation method that's supported by Fastify, the framework that Platformatic is built on top of. And here we're going to specify that we want to use properties, and we're going to have an ID property. So app.getSchema allows us to get the schema which has been automatically generated by Platformatic DB. And we're going to use that ID property, so that will have specify that the type should be a number. So to reuse that to validate this ID here. We could be using it to validate other request properties if we had, say, a request body coming in. But in this case, we've just got the ID coming through in the URL. So now we've got this validation in place, we need to actually make our route handler here do something useful rather than just return an empty object. Let's add an async function. And this async function is going to be the one that actually increments the quote likes for us. So we're going to say increment quote likes, and it'll accept an ID. And inside of here we're going to use a couple of helper methods which are available as part of Platformatic. So Platformatic DB has automatically added this app.platformatic, and then we can actually access DB and SQL helpers. Now let's see how we can use them to run a query against our database. So we're going to actually run a database query, and we'll use that SQL helper here to actually escape any input in our query. We'll see in a moment just how that works. So we're going to be updating our quotes table, and we're going to be setting the likes to actually add 1. So whatever value is currently there, we'll increment it by 1. And then we'll do that specifically for whatever quote you've passed the ID for. So that's the input that we're talking about here. And we want to make sure that this is safe. So this SQL helper here will actually go and take these values and make sure that they are escaped and there's nothing malicious that can go into our database, which is an added layer of protection on top of this schema that we're already adding for our request data. Now we'll see here that we're actually returning the likes back from our query after we've actually updated that quote likes field, and then we're going to return that back from the function. So we'll add this here to make sure that we return the likes, and that's available then for us. So now let's go and use this function here in our root handler, and we're going to say likes, and we'll be awaiting this increment quote likes function, and then we're going to pass through the request param, and that's the request param ID that we've got coming through here. So we've got a few different moving parts here. We have our root, which is a post request that comes through. We're validating with a schema this ID, and that's here reusing part of our Platformatic DB generated schema. And we're able to then use these helpers here to run a query against our database and actually go and increment the likes and then send back that in our response from the API endpoint. Before we can commit this, there's one small tweak we need to make. So we're going to head over into our dynamic workflow, and when we copied this over from the docs earlier, we missed out just changing this dynamic workspace ID. So I'm going to grab that out from my notes. So this is the dynamic workspace ID, and we'll pop that back in there. And now we've got everything set up. We can actually just run get status to check what changes we have. Great, so we've got our migrations that we've just created to add that quotes table and to link it to the movies. We've got our custom functionality for liking quotes, and then we've got that fixed up Platformatic dynamic workspace for deploying with GitHub Actions. So let's git add everything, and we're going to git commit add quotes features, and then we can push that all up to GitHub. And now that's all pushed up, we can copy this link here and head over into our browser and use it to create a new pull request. So this is adding our quotes features. When we scroll down, it'll take a moment, but we'll see that the GitHub action should kick in, and it's going to start deploying things to Platformatic Cloud, to our dynamic workspace. So we can head over here and watch that build and deploy in action. Once our deployment's complete, we can take a look here and see the URL that it was deployed to. So this is a dynamic workspace application, and we can open it up here, and we'll see our Platformatic DB homepage. And we can then jump into our OpenAPI documentation. We'll see that as well as movies, we've got those quotes that we just added into our schema. So that's been added into our database. And that's actually in our branch database. If we head into Neon, we can take a look here and see that we have this branch database, which is containing this all its own isolated database, separate from our production one, which is here for the main branch. So we can go ahead and actually test that out, and let's actually go and add a movie. So we'll click on post movies, and we're going to add a movie, Toy Story 3, and we can see that it's gone ahead and actually created that for us and added it into the database. And now let's go ahead and add a quote. So we can head down to our post quotes route, try it out. So we'll move that ID, and so it's going to be a hilarious quote, because unfortunately I can't remember anything from that movie. It'll be said by Woody, and we'll set the likes to 0 and the movie ID to 1, and we're going to execute that, and we can see that's then being saved into our database, and it's automatically handled, adding that created at for us. We've got our movie ID, and we've got the auto-generated ID 1. So now we can go and actually use our like endpoint with that custom functionality that we built into our plugin. Let's try that out. And we're going to say 1, the ID of the quote, and execute that. And we'll see down here that we've got the likes coming back. Now, if we hit execute again, we'll see it's incremented to 2. And we can actually see over here, if we go into Platformatic Cloud, that we've got in our dynamic previews workspace, we've got that pull request that we've just been looking at. So we can go into the PR details, And we can see all the metrics will load in here for our application, so we can actually see the performance of the changes that we've made and what impact they have on our applications. We can also then go ahead and take a look at the logs for our application too, to debug and look at anything we might want to check out from our application logs. Then we can actually go over here and take a look at our branch database, and if we have a look, we can see that we've got the tables here, and we can switch over to that branch one. We can take a look at all the tables we have, and we've got the quotes here, and we can see that it's storing that quote in the branch database. So this dynamic workspace app that we have deployed here for our pull request is talking to this branch database on Neon, which is completely separate from our main database, which is being connected to by our application, which is deployed in our static production workspace. So we've got completely isolated application deploys and completely isolated databases for each application. One final thing to mention is that anytime we actually create a pull request, we will get a comment automatically added onto our pull request once it's been deployed to Platformatic Cloud into that dynamic workspace. So we don't need to even go and watch those GitHub Actions logs unless we really want to. We can actually just access everything directly here from the pull request and share it with our team. Thank you for joining us today as we've taken a look at some of the incredible features in Platformatic Cloud. It provides a fantastic workflow for testing and deploying your Node.js applications. We hope you'll give it a try. Head over to platformatic.cloud to get started.